周一長談，我哋而家翻嚟同大家繼續談最近國會裏邊度辯論得非常激烈嘅幾個法案。我哋頭先傾過嘅係入籍法，而家咧跟住落嚟，我要同大家傾下嘅第二個，亦都係大家影響好大嘅我哋選舉法嘅一啲修改。Once again, thank you very much for coming. 我哋今日請到嘅係 Davies， 係 Kingsway 嘅 MP， 佢亦都係國會裏邊度反對黨嘅影子內閣，專係對政府呢方面移民同埋國際貿易方面嘅政策提出佢哋嘅睇法同埋建議嘅。The C23, it's been a big the thunder, and it got every media's attention, and everyone is talking about it over coffee or Chinese tea. It's a big issue. So right now, they've changed everything. It's almost after the senator proposed 9 points for changes. I think they basically has accepted that version and come up with a new version to be presented to you guys. And I want to focus on a couple of those changes. Number one is that the voucher system, they have restored that. And but it's make some changes. I would let you to introduce what kind of changes they have made and what is your take on that?
Well, the general context, I think, is important, which is, we deal with many issues in Parliament of Canada, and a lot of them are questions of philosophy or approach or policy. But once in a while, we get issues that are fundamental. They're not issues of the right or the left or the center. They're issues that go to the foundation of our country. And I think C23 is one of those because it concerns our electoral system. It involves how we elect people. It involves our democracy. And so I'm really happy to see the way this issue has developed. I think it shows the strength of Canadian democracy. You had the government introduce a bill, and then you had my leader, Tom Mulcair, who's leader of the official opposition, who chose to make it a major priority. And so the NDP devoted major resources to bringing this issue to the attention of the Canadian population. We asked for cross-country hearings. We conducted cross-country hearings. We held this up in Parliament, and we proposed a number of amendments. And then the Canadian public got involved. So I think and
then the Senate turned it around.
They did, and now you're seeing, to give credit to the Conservative government, the government has responded. And so I think it's a really good example of Canadian democracy working the way it's intended to work. As an opposition, it's our job to not just oppose, but to propose, to offer some solutions, which we've done. And a good government, I think, listens to those proposals and amends accordingly. And the Harper government has done that. So I think it's a victory for everybody. It's a victory for the Conservatives, for the NDP, for the Canadian public, and the parliamentary structure. Now let's get into some of the details. I think the amendments that have been proposed by Minister Pierre Poilievre, the Minister of Democratic Reform, go a long way to addressing the concerns that have been mentioned. I don't think that they deal with all of the problems that have been identified. There are still some significant flaws in the bill, but certainly the bill is much improved. The original bill got rid of vouching, which for your viewers who may not know, you could go into a voting station at election time, and if you didn't have ID that showed where you lived, another person who knows you could sign a document and attest or vouch. One person could do it before, could vouch for a person. You could only do it for one person, and then that person would be given a ballot and voted. Now, you might think, well, this is a dangerous situation, but for students who are going away to school, who don't have ID where they're going to school, or seniors who live in seniors' homes, or oftentimes poorer people who don't have the proper ID, this was a challenge. I've read that somewhere between 300 and 500,000 Canadians voted last election under the vouching system. So the original bill got rid of that. The government has decided to put that back in a modified form. So now, as long as the person coming to the voting booth has ID that shows who they are, then another person can vouch for them and they will be able to vote, even if they don't have something, identification that shows where they live. So I think that's a compromise in the right direction. The original bill prevented the election officer, the chief election officer, from commenting on issues in the election.
Yes.
The changes have restored that and do allow the
in their
election
word,
officer.
they said he can say whatever he wants.
Well, I think that's important in a democracy. You know, the original bill restricted the officer from just saying where to vote, when to vote, how to vote. We think it's important that the chief electoral officer have the ability to be commenting on the fairness of the election, because political parties, we have our own views, but the electoral officer is independent, and I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think as an election act, an election operation, a third-party affair that is nonpartisan's involvement and giving them the power is very, very important. But before I close this subject with you, is there anything left in this bill that you are really unhappy with?
There's a few things. The original reason that there's a bill before Parliament is because in the last election there were some examples where people were taking advantage of the system. We don't know who, but there were robocalls made, directing people to the wrong polls. There was some overspending and questions about whether candidates were spending according to the limits. So one thing that the New Democrats were looking for is to give the electoral officer increased powers to order the production of documents and to compel the testimony of people from political parties. Those powers are still not there.
What I've read is the companies who does all these calls, they need to keep the record not 1 year but 3 years. Do you think that has addressed or is not enough?
I think it's a good start, and I think that does address part of it, which is record keeping. But unless you have a system that can compel those records and can compel people to come forward and give information if they have it, the recent decision of the electoral officer that said they're not proceeding, and the RCMP not to proceed with robocall charges, is because the election officer did not have the ability to get the information they needed to proceed. So that is, I think, an omission. That is a problem with the current bill. And second, the election officer still cannot run programs to encourage voting among young people. The election officer has traditionally run programs in schools to encourage young people to learn about the system. And from my understanding, that power has been taken away from the election officer, and I'd like to see that returned, because we only had a 60% turnout in the last federal election. And I think we should be trying to encourage
It seems that they have allowed them to do it in the elementary school, those who will not be voting. But I think they still maintain the proposal of not encouraging that the Election Canada is not in a position to encourage people to come and vote.
Yes, and this is something I'll need to check, but I believe that the compromise here is the original bill took away the power of the election officer to run programs, and I believe now they are allowing the elections officer to support other parties who are not political parties, but other organizations, but can't deliver the programs themselves. Now, I might be mistaken on that, but I'd like to see at any event the election officer doing whatever is needed to encourage people to exercise their democratic vote, no matter who they vote for.
Well, I think this is a very interesting development of events, because now everyone can claim some credit. Even the Conservative Party has said that we listened. And that's democracy.
That's true.
Is the process. Now, before the last question that I want to talk to with you about is international trade, which is your major area of critics. Of course, there's a lot of things, but I would like to focus on the transparency, because you have been calling for transparency, and even with Honduras recently, is it right? And with Korean and Eastern European. And I think in some way, a lot of people echoes what you think, is that this whole negotiation process is like in back doors. and no one knows what's going on, and now we come up to it. But at the same time, as international negotiations, it does need some kind of a backdoor negotiation. So what is your take on how to balance that?
Well, I've been critic now for coming up 2 years, and my analysis right now is that we thoroughly understand that these important negotiations must be conducted in large part behind closed doors. We must give Canadian negotiators the room that they need to explore options. And of course, we don't want to broadcast Canada's objectives or bargaining strategy to the world. So we fully understand that. At the same time, I do believe and have come to believe that there is room for more transparency in the process than is currently the case. For instance, I think that the government of Canada is negotiating not on behalf of the Conservative Party or the New Democrats or the Liberals. They're bargaining on behalf of all Canadians, particularly the business community. So I think that at the beginning of the process, to involve a lot of people in formulating proposals at the beginning, and then periodically through negotiations, giving a general report back to the Canadian people of the progress that's being made in general terms, I think would be very helpful to the system. You know, right now, Canada's involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP.
Yeah.
This is 12 countries, including the United States and some Asian countries, like Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, Chile, Peru, and a few others, and Japan. Right now, as we speak, American lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats in Congress, can go to the U.S. Trade Office and they can read the text.
The Americans.
The Americans, right now. Now they must sign a confidentiality agreement. They can't talk about what they read, but they're allowed to read the text so that they can be informed about what's going on. We can't do that in Canada. And I believe it puts Canadian lawmakers at a disadvantage. I'm the official opposition trade critic, and my job is to hold the government to account, to offer proposals, and that's my constitutional parliamentary responsibility, and I can't do that very well if I'm frozen.
That's why my last question is, as an official critic of international trade, do you have any privilege in access of information? If you don't, how do you do your job?
Well, I don't. I do not, and it makes my job more difficult. We rely on leaked versions of documents. In some cases, I have to go to some extraordinary lengths. For instance, a month ago, I was
like WikiLeaks.
Like WikiLeaks, yes. WikiLeaks released chapters of the CETA, the Canada-EU agreement. I went to Washington, D.C. a month ago and met with American lawmakers. I learned more from American lawmakers in Washington than I have from our own government in Ottawa. Yes, about the Canadian bargaining position. So I believe it's important for the government to conduct a good, strong trade policy, but like with C23, when you open up some of the dialogue, sometimes you get good suggestions that strengthen the agreement, and you get better agreement from the Canadian public. So I'm calling on the federal government to look for ways to become more accountable and be more transparent while preserving that important discretion that I think we need.
Thank you very much. 非常多謝大家。我哋今日咧係請到嘅係 MP Davies， 佢亦都係國際貿易同埋移民政策等等嘅問題喺國會裏邊專負責代表 NDP 嚟向保守黨政府提出佢哋嘅睇法嘅。今日我哋好多謝能夠有呢個機會，佢俾我哋從另外一個角度去睇呢啲等等嘅目前非常熱鬧嘅問題。周一長談今日到此為止，我哋下一次再見啦。我係 BC Lee 黎拔佳 ，Thank you。